Hi there.
I was just starting looking at the setting up reviewers thing. Sort of a bit painful first time round. I'm sure it'll get easier. But
Yes, I may need to consult you on that.
well, I haven't done it yet.
I got to a page where I found a lot of choices to make, and I thought perhaps we should be making the same sort of choices. But
Yeah, well, okay. Maybe we have a chat afterwards, or later today, whenever.
yeah,
I haven't made finished my job or hardly started it. Some colleagues got sick, so I had quite some extra teaching on my plate.
Well, I did do what I'd sort of offered to do, which was to look through some of my, things that I'd downloaded, but quite a few, and I did find some things in the email I sent that looked that would plug that 2015 onwards gap, but quite a few of them are by you or others, and I think might be quite good to replace some of the earlier ones that we cited. But I think you're the person to say what would best fit.
Okay, I will.
So you might have a look at those.
Yeah.
And I mean, you or Tom or whoever, but stuff where you're much more expert than me anyway.
Okay, I will have a look.
Morning, everyone.
Hi, Glenn.
Thanks very much, Valerie, for ending those.
Well, no problem. I was just saying, though, I mean, they were. Hopefully, they'll just fill a little gap. Some or all of them, and they're a bit more up to date than some of the ones we were citing, so might be useful.
Yeah, I had a similar look back through some of my network references, and I sort of identified one that I've added to your document on there, which is about dynamic networks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I agree completely with Peter, because I've had a week full of exams, so I haven't done my endemic work. But I saw that Daniel this morning had done some research on endemic papers. But I will try to do as soon as possible my homework.
Thank you, Jumpy. Yeah, I've also had a particularly manic.
No. You had to prepare the long talk for RAMP or something like that. I kind of.
Yeah.
There's a lot of activity these days. A lot of meetings on. I spend much more time than before just listening to meetings or participating in meetings or whatever. I have less and less time to do something. But it's interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, that's for sure.
Yes, I missed Glenn's talk. And it's not, the recording doesn't seem to be up yet, so I'm
right.
I don't know when it'll be, but
well, I think it can be kind of abstractly into Scotland is doing fine or something like that, right?
Well, I mainly spoke about methods because I
noticed you didn't say so much about Scotland. Yeah. Or it's
yeah.
Well, the presenter supposed that you were going to say things about Scotland.
Yeah, I think there was a bit of misunderstanding there because I did change. When they asked me to talk, they suggested that title, and I said, well, I'd rather talk about. Gave them another title, but then it never quite got changed on the website.
But it is with COVID, like it has always been, that Scotland has its own reporting system separate from England and Wales, which has always been like that. I mean, with disease models and whatever. It is still so with COVID as well.
Yeah.
But although some of us have not done their homework, what is the feeling now? How will the paper now how will it be rewritten? How will it be reformulated? Do we make small changes, just renewing the references and refreshing the paper, or do we make some larger intervention?
I mean, yeah, I mean, my feeling is we should make relatively small changes, but maybe focused in some sections. And yeah, I think, and try and make the case for why it's, you know, that it is, I think it is different from the other, apart from some of the, I think Dennis kind of last week had mentioned some things where it was overlap with interventions. But so I think maybe that section we need to think a bit more about what the challenges are in terms of formulating models. Because I think from attending this RAMP meeting this week, I kind of, it solidified my thinking that, you know, there's these extremely complex agent-based models, which, you know, they use all sorts of data to try and work out where people move, but to some extent, they're still not very predictive, or, you know, they're quite, I think, in a sense, I mean, this is my prejudice, right? But in a sense, I think they're quite correlative in that they reproduce the behavior that's been seen, but it's not clear to me, and the discussion we had in my breakout group, at least, was along the lines that there needs to be a bit of a move towards building some kind of constraints into these models so that, you know, they become a bit more predictive, in the sense that, you know, some people are, well, I guess the sort of, you know, the easiest example to explain is you can avoid the supermarket until you run out of food, but there comes a point where you just have to go to the supermarket. And I think similar ideas could be applied to other behaviors as well. So you could think of, like, you know, you run out of money, you have to go to work, you can't. You know.
But for instance, I've noticed that longer hairstyles have become quite fashionable. So we could apparently do without.
Do that hairdressers.
Yes, hairdressers.
I don't know, if you listen to the media when they reopened hairdressers here, it seemed like it was an essential service. So. My daughter cuts our hair anyway, so I'm kind of quite lucky on that. Anyway, that was kind of a long-winded way of saying that I still think there are some sort of methodological challenges to incorporate some level of behavioural response in sort of models that are tractable, or at least possibly tractable.
No, my feeling, which is not very well founded, is that I still have doubts about exactly how well contact tracing can work, and also how it could work with and without apps and things like that. I find that is not really well explained, at least to my knowledge. And maybe a little bit predicting people's behavior. I've noticed there are several newspaper articles about the fact that government has tried to decide but has not considered that people would in some sense self-organize and etc. Maybe some restrictions were not really necessary the way they were formulated if one had let people organize themselves, etc. So these models about spontaneous behavior or social behavior are not really incorporated in our models.
Yeah.
I don't know. Those are the things that have been least clear in a way. If contact tracing, how it would really work, or how to model it correctly in its effects. And,
I mean, my feeling is that the section we have on contact tracing is actually quite.
Yes, we already have quite a weight on that.
Quite well considered, and it's
Yes.
got lots of references, and I think it's quite up to date, thanks to Francesca. So I think that in a way that's the bit one of the sections I'm least concerned about. But I agree, the sort of the spontaneous.
One thing that is missing, I don't know, Francesca must have looked at that a little bit, is descriptions of how contact tracing really is done. do people do forward contact tracing or backward tracing, or how far in generations are they doing contact tracing, or what is the real timing of contact tracing? I haven't seen much on how it really is done, but somebody must have described it or written about it.
So this is a question out of the scope of the paper, right? Or
I would
Well,
agree.
you
you
would
mean
agree.
in the,
Well, yes or no, because we have to suppose things in our models. And some things are supposable in the sense that we say the distribution of time until a contact is found follows F. That can be done. But is that really what happens? I mean, is there a kind of just random variation in the time, or is it more that some people are not followed, others are? And so some things really depend on how they do it. Other things on details that we could just suppose theoretically to be something unknown but knowable. You know about all these known unknowns and unknown unknowns, and
yeah, I'm just wondering if yeah, so yeah, I guess that's a big problem, but it's probably a communication problem between modelers and people who act in practice.
yes.
Yeah.
Or maybe, as Peter and I are interested in, I mean, is there backward tracing and forward tracing of these separate entities? Because in a tree, they are kind of different things, but how is it in practice? Does somebody sit down and say, today I will do backward tracing, or
Yeah.
today I will do forward tracing? I don't know how people think about that stuff. And also what the role of households is. I mean, do contact traces start with the household that then usually say, I don't have time for the rest? Because then we would have to do all our models in household fashion and stuff like that.
It also
That's how I see that the practice influences our modeling in a way.
Yeah, I think that in East Asia, where the contact tracing is has been quite efficient in, at least in finding contact trees. And there was quite some things on restaurants as well. So people leave their names behind if they are, or their phone numbers behind if they have been in a restaurant. So, but of course, that's not a difference. I don't think it's a difference between contact tracing and or forward and backward tracing. It's just, okay, we know this guy was here when he could be infected or could have been infecting others. So that is forward and backward tracing, and you just call everybody who was.
Yeah, that's about the identification probability in a way.
Maybe I misunderstand the terminology, but I in my mind, backwards tracing was about tracing the contacts of the contacts. So you take the in. Is that completely wrong? So you would sort of take the individual that you text, and then you ask them who their contacts were, and then you would try and trace the contacts of those.
But you could in graph way try to focus on who probably infected you, because that's a graph theoretically interesting person. And you could focus on that. Can you remember backwards when you could have been infected, etc., compared to last days, whom have you met and coughed on? But I don't know if that's how exactly people pose the questions. That's how they try to do it.
Yeah, in models, I have looked for contact tracing for sure. Forward tracing is trying to find who you might have infected, and backward tracing is trying to find who might have infected you.
There people kind of don't have that much modeling, because it turns out to be complicated to go backwards in the tree, because then you go backwards and then you must go forwards from the places you find backwards. And the question is how big a tree you're investigating at the end. There's some kind of timing limits the tree that you have to investigate.
I mean, the stuff I've read about contact tracing, they just ask you who you've come into contact with, and so it's kind of hard to distinguish who your sort of donor was.
Yes, it could be that that's how they do it. That they just said, last week, whom have you met? And then that could be the infector, it could be infectees, it could be Maybe that's how they do it. I don't know. Or if they
I
say
think it
things
also
like,
depends.
"Since you had symptoms, whom have you met?" Or
Yeah.
I think it also depends how far back in the past they're going. If they ask you how many people you have met in the last 2 days, they are probably searching for for who you infected. But if they're asking who did you contact 1 or 2 weeks ago, then they're probably looking for who was the responsible of that.
Mhm.
But I feel these are so I'm not sure if we should go more into detail of contact tracing in this paper, considering
No.
that it looks more like an intervention. I think we may translate it into like network modeling or communication challenges or understanding what's happening in practice.
But wouldn't it be good to separate out what's happening in practice, which is, as far as I understand it, mainly trying to trace other possible people who are infected and get them to self-isolate and so on, from the modeling aspect of, if we could trace these people either forward or backwards, how much difference would it make? Isn't that a sort of a difference?
Yes. But what I mean with this relation with practice is that if everybody who does it also considers a time limit, say, whom have you met the last week? If that's the standard way, then we should also have a time limit in our models and say, at least related to some time scale, right? That
Yeah.
one goes backward 1 week and then sees what happens. Or something like that, if that's what is really being done, because otherwise we could say, let's go back to the infector always, but that may not be what happens. Or
I mean, I guess the problem with COVID is that because it's aerosol based, the number of people you come into contact with over 2 weeks, say, could be absolutely
it's enormous.
Really huge.
And that's one calculation I've never seen, for instance, for the apps, how many people get involved with your infection compared to how many infected you find. The few things I've seen is that the percentage was extremely small that was really infected of all those that were notified or something. But that's more of a practical aspect. If you send 100 people to get tested to find one person or something, it's not that practical.
But I do kind of agree with Valerie, though, that in a way the job of modeling isn't necessarily to stick to reality too much, in the sense that we can kind of show what's really possible if the technology was available to do a more sophisticated tracing.
My remark was more that I felt that there's still something to understand about that field. Exactly, but exactly what it is that we have to understand, I'm not really sure. But there's something in the way where we are phrasing.
Well, I guess also those specifics are probably going to change quite a lot depending on the disease. On the transmission.
Oh yes, and in practice, I guess very much upon the resources people are willing to invest in it, because of course, if you have 1,000 people at the phone trying to contact others, makes a difference to 10 people trying to do or something like that.
Yeah. So Francesca, thanks for looking at the household references. I was kind of wondering could you maybe talk us through, do you think they all should be mentioned?
So I wanted to ask for feedback or about what would be good to do next, because so I have had limited time. So what I did was first to search what new papers concerning households have come out in the last, since 2014-15. So I was going through the abstract and trying to understand what problems they address. But then I wanted to ask to everyone, what is it better that I do? Because indeed the current paragraphs on households in the paper are quite general. So I don't know if Right. So I didn't know what was the best way to go forward. I do appreciate that the current list is a bit too wide, and I could narrow it down when I have some more time. But so I was going through the 2015 modeling paper, household paper or metapopulation paper, and trying to see what of those challenges have. So what work has been done in some of those challenges. But I'm not really sure how to include these references in the paper. Just maybe that was is a question that Jampi asked before. Like, do we just want to include more updated references, or do we want to expand on the?
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is it'd be kind of good, given Hans's comments, it'd be quite good to expand and say, these were the challenges that were identified in 2015 have been, these ones have been progressed.
So maybe I can see what challenges are. I can go back to our current paper and see what challenges are mentioned again, and try to see if there are references missing.
I think I was thinking there would be place for some of these in the introduction, where we're sort of general scene setting, and we could make it perhaps a bit more up to date, and also talk about the challenges from last time and so on in a paragraph or two there, as well as possibly, read the specific challenges later. Incidentally, there's a bit of overlap between your list and mine, which is really
I know.
That's good.
I know. Yeah, I suspected so, but I didn't have time to carefully cross-check.
That's reassuring.
That's good. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
And it means there's slightly less to do than we think there is.
Yeah. Also, that list, I didn't narrow down the list, but I think some of them may not be very well informative, in the sense that some of them have some maybe not so much theoretical advances, but applications or so. I should look a bit more carefully.
Did you work independently? Because then we could do recapture and see how many we have missed collectively also.
Yeah,
but I think we were using different search.
I was just going through papers I downloaded that were generic rather than COVID. Obviously we were doing a different strategy. So
yeah, and I was focusing on households, and then I had some collateral papers on metapopulation approach and networks approach, but I didn't focus on networks per se.
Well, mine was meant to be networks, but a few others crept in. So
no, but I think I feel some that I found would actually be important to cite, but maybe some not. But I can go through the list again and maybe ask Peter or Lorenzo for some feedback from experts.
I mean, we could also divide and conquer a little bit. So,
yeah.
Rather than one person doing it all.
I think, the difficulty all this is it would be, ideally we would end up with something shorter rather than longer. So it's trying to find a summary way as possible of saying, as indicating which, I suppose the crucial thing we're trying to summarize as briefly as we can is where there have been progress made or challenges are no longer thought to be perhaps so important, and but to highlight most of all things that really remain as challenges.
I'm now looking through the papers. I should, so both of you refer to the paper by by Frank, Lorenzo, and me, as opposed to the paper by Lorenzo, Frank, and me.
well,
now there were two papers, and I actually think for this volume, or for this paper, the paper by Lorenzo, Frank, so Pellis, Ball, Trapman
Is
is more.
that the one where there's paper 1 and paper 2?
Yeah, exactly.
I think I picked paper 2 simply because paper 1 was quite a bit earlier, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's true.
And I was so I eliminated that because it was pre 20.
Okay, yeah.
But
I
that,
probably did the same automatically in the sense that I filtered.
but you know, if you think the other one's more appropriate, then clearly we
Yeah.
go with that.
Yeah, and this paper is important on if you want to discuss different definitions of R naught and how they or of reproduction numbers and how they are related to each other, which I think is a very important question to answer, but it is a more theoretical approach. While
That's paper 1, right? That's paper 1 mainly.
Oh yeah, this one is about the computation of R naught, I think. And let me now see.
Well, since they're a pair, we could possibly squeeze them both in if necessary.
Also,
Oh yeah, paper 1 is about the definition of R naught. Here we compare, in this paper we compare different
definitions and see that they agree, and then some orderings of them, right?
Yeah. So here, yeah, it is what you want to compare. And I think one important part here, which is also done by Goldstein et al., is how to relate the real-time growth rate to R naught.
Mm-hmm.
If the households are involved. But yeah, perhaps they are a pair. We were at some moment afraid that it will be as, I think one paper by Odo Diekman and Hans Metz and someone who had a paper numbered part 1, or they had a paper which has had part 1 in the title and part 2 never seen the daylight.
Yeah. Well, not yet.
Yeah, that's true.
That's right, truncated.
Yeah, I think it's already 30-year-old now. But definitely the paper by Frank, Dave, Tom, and Cayenne is worth mentioning at some moment, I think. I didn't think of that, but yeah, you both mentioned it, I think.
yeah, so I guess the question is also, we didn't want to include too many references, right? Like we want to keep it essential.
We've
So
already got quite a lot.
right. So so I'm happy to try to propose something, but I think I will need some help because I don't really, I mean, of course, I'm not expert, so I wouldn't be able to understand which are actually important and or more theoretically important and which are less. But
Yeah, I wouldn't, so Valerie also suggested a paper by Carolina Fransson and me. It is nice. It's a nice paper, and it definitely is an addition. Carolina needs or deserves praise for that paper, but it might be really a theoretical addition of being able to do something more than Joel Miller and others are doing. But it's
Well, that's right. I mean, I put some of the others down, but I found actually when I dug into them, quite a lot of them are you know, following the mean field sort of approximations.
But I think Lorenzo has a better overview of the papers which are not in probability journals or a Journal of Mathematical Biology than I have. So yeah,
yes, my list is a bit biased because it tends to be the ones that I look at the journals of.
So yeah. And I wonder, so there I saw also quite some paper by Joel Miller and Istvan Kiss.
Yeah,
Would
there are
that,
several on my list, I think, by.
Yeah.
um,
are they covered in their book? Or
when was the book?
well, or the ideas covered in the book. The book was, I think, 2018 as well. I just have a look.
Not sure then.
Oh, the book was 2017.
Yeah, so the ones I put in my list were 2018 and 2019. So who knows? Maybe not.
Let me look at the.
But since we're trying to keep the number of references down, maybe just giving a reference to the book would be.
Yeah, I think that would be quite nice.
Would be a good idea.
Because I saw there was, I think, one paper referring to non-Markovian things done by them, and they have a chapter on that in the book as well. So
Yeah, that was one of the 2018 papers I dug out, was that. Yeah. We had sort of subgroups writing the different sections. So would that be the way to go forward to?
Yeah, I was just thinking that. So it seems to me that we've got the sections to have another go at, I guess, at the introduction. And then within 6.1, I think it probably makes more sense to divide 6.1 into sort of maybe two sections. So there's the household model section, which perhaps could be looked at with a view to updating with some of these references. And then there's the spatial and network models and the behavior and interventions, and maybe that needs to be combined into one section. I don't know.
But they're not rather different. I mean, I thought on the spatial network, I would just like to add something which might almost just be a change to the last sentence, but maybe be an extra sentence, which is that in this difficulty of trying to understand spatial structure and come up with better models for it, it seemed to me that something to mention was that the COVID-19 pandemic will have generated huge amounts of data on actual human structures in all sorts of different parts of the world, and also of the, with and without various sorts of interventions. So a real challenge would be to make use of all this new data to get a better understanding of spatial structures. So just,
I guess the same. So that's why I thought maybe. I mean, I'm happy to keep them separate, but I think a similar challenge relates to just understanding contact patterns generally.
Yeah. But the behavior, the thing is, the behavior paragraph, I suppose I thought was the one that had definitely overlapped with interventions paper.
Yeah, but I think that's because, so in my view anyway, there's something to rescue from that, which is this idea that we would really like to incorporate behavior at some level, even in a sort of abstract way. We would like to incorporate sort of behavior into some more tractable models, I think. And I think there is a halfway house between, the really detailed kind of agent-based modeling that people do, which is very data-driven, and kind of models that at least recognize that their behavior, people respond to epidemics in certain ways.
But Dennis's question leads to another question. I mean, we have much more now contact studies than we had when Polymod came out. Say, several people have done more and using apps and various things. And also travel data. We have a lot of these mobility data, either from mobile phones or other things that we follow. But has anybody tried to really isolate how well correlated they are to infection? Because they are, of course, surrogates of something that we feel is important for transmitting infection. But how well does it correlate? Because we are using it as the only thing that we have measured now that should correlate with infectious contacts, at least for airborne things and stuff like that. But I've always wondered, I mean, if you travel to some place, do you really behave like the locals? Can you really in a model just say, now you're in that city and you do as they do or not? And all these contacts, I mean, usually in the contact studies, there are 2 or 3 levels: intimate contact, talking contact, etc. And now and then models fiddle with these and say, I take the intimate ones, or I take the total ones, or I take these. But has anybody succeeded in investigating how well correlated they are really to infection or transport of infection? Because it's a question of exactly what we measure, because we all admit that we cannot measure infection. So we know that we have just correlates of it, but
So
what is the correlation coefficient?
Is the challenge then similar to what I was saying, that it's the challenge is to make use of these various sorts of data, which, as you say, are indirect evidence to try and get better models?
Yes, and also understand how indirect they are. I mean, what's the correlation coefficient would be a very crude statistical question.
Yeah.
I don't know. Once again, it might be that I haven't followed the correct literature on.
Well, I mean, I think that sort of abstract, sort of abstract question of how can we use data on interventions to help improve modeling for the future very much belongs with us. But I was concerned that I think quite a lot of what we've got here overlaps with the interventions paper, and probably we should leave it, leave those bits to them. So in other words, just sort of, state there's an area of interest and give a reference and say this is covered in the interventions paper. But I think it's for whoever wrote these paragraphs, please to do that. So in other words, I suppose to distinguish by what we should keep and what we should maybe cede to the interventions paper. In the same sort of vein, later on in the paper, there are bits in the later sections, when we come to them, where I feel that the people who wrote them need to take a look at the overlaps, please.
Which section, sorry?
Well, say, is it 6.4 and 5? I mean, the whole real-time support thing is 6.3, I think, is okay, the pathogen perspective. There's the contact tracing we've already referred to, which I suppose we might overlap with estimational data, but I suppose I'm principally concerned with interventions. And the real-time decision support, that's surely overlaps with interventions. I mean, it's possible that when you look at the overlaps that you would say, could the people from the interventions paper please leave this to us? But I think more it's maybe leaving some of this stuff to them.
Yeah, I think it's about trying to emphasize what it is about modeling that is true.
Yes, it's what is essentially about modeling and getting better models for the future. And once it gets into anything more detailed than that, more applied end, it's probably best left to the paper or papers.
But maybe once most of the papers have gone into Hans Hesterbeck to look at, then maybe he can have this overview. In
Well,
the sense of saying,
that
he
could be
has
helpful.
already said something to us that he feels that we have some overlap with other papers. But have most papers gone into Hans now for a first look?
They have now, yes. I think he's seen most of them. The one or two that haven't, but he, of course, he's looked at them as he got them in. So
I was going to say, I kind of feel it's up to us to make sure there is overlap as well. It's a bit unfair to ask Hans to do that.
But maybe we should see what it will be.
I was
helpful
trying to
if he
delegate
says about
that
these other
process.
ones, I won't it?
So anyway, I agree that the later sections need to be gone through and try and strip out stuff that is overlapping with the other papers.
I mean, we don't. I think I'm right in saying we don't have comments on the interventions paper back from Hans. I think it's gone to him.
Yeah.
And that is one that we're, so his comments to us, this was relatively early on and he hadn't seen the other papers, many of them. He was just going on what we said about references to them and so on, rather than actually knowing what the overlaps were.
Yes, exactly. I think part of it was that I threw in so many cross references that it seemed that it was very dependent, whereas I actually don't necessarily think that was true.
No, I think they misled him somewhat. That would be my guess. But
yeah.
Coming back to the bit of 6.1 on behaviour interventions and contact processes, are you going to do some rewriting there, Glenn, or is that someone else?
Yeah, I was thinking I would. I mean, as I say, I'm kind of somewhat open to the idea. We could have something like 2 sections in here. We could have network models and we could have you could have household models and then spatial and network models.
Yeah.
And that might just incorporate some of the things that I think are more methodological that relate to.
Maybe it might be better to, might it be possibly better to make behaviour and interventions things you refer to in those sections rather than having a separate heading for it?
Yes, exactly. That's kind of what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, can you make a note of that point about the challenge and opportunity from
I've done that.
to help us improve modelling? And if I let you take a lead on that, Glenn, but if you show me a draft at some point, perhaps I could see if it's sort of saying what I would like it to say on the.
Yeah, no, that would be great. Thanks.
Oh, happy to read it through when you've got something. And yeah.
And then, so then there's so has anyone got time to sort of look at the household section in light of, and maybe just think about tying it back to some of the challenges from the 2015 and what's happened since?
I will try to have a look. I'm not sure yet whether I find the time, but
yeah, sure.
It also depends when colleagues come back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can also help, but from an ignorant perspective, if needed. I don't know if that helps or is less helpful. I mean, if you need help, but I'm not expert, just drop me an email.
Well, the best help would be to have Lorenzo have a quick look at it. But
yeah, maybe I can poke Lorenzo. Maybe I can have that task of poking Lorenzo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. It's Lorenzo and Thomas Howes seem to be the main experts now at the moment.
I'll poke there.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. also want a couple of people to look at the introduction in light of Hans.
So your voice is, I don't hear you very well.
Do we want people to, so is there anyone that's keen to look at the introduction and try and
I'm
modify
not sure
it?
keen is quite the right.
Maybe is a better word.
I mean, yeah, I'm happy to have a go, but I'd like some guidance, really, I think, or somebody else to do it with, in terms of what, because we sort of were implying that we need to take some of this out and to update it by putting in some of the you know, some of the background through the previous challenges and what's changed and so on.
Yeah.
I feel a little bit responsible because I started out with Daniel Bernoulli or something like that.
Well, I think we can see he's only a sentence, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we have him, and then suddenly in 2015, no, that's okay.
Well, I mean, all we've got in that first paragraph now is you've got Bernoulli, you've got the reference, the sort of historical reference. We've got Diekman et al., you know, for everything that's happened up to then, to 2013.
Yes.
And then we just go forward. So, I mean, I don't think there's a lot of spurious
No,
stuff.
no, there's not very much history left.
But perhaps we can...
and maybe we had to take away, or have already done so, part of these innovations from previous pandemics and epidemics, right? The HIV stuff and stuff.
I think, yes, I think the implication from Hans was, or at least to change the references.
Yeah.
Yes, but we can also take them out. No examples, just saying that, of course, modeling is influenced by events that kind of make people want to do new things depending on the disease, right? So, of course, previous pandemics have stimulated some research into new things, but once again, we can jump to 2015 to say how the situation was.
Well, Hans seemed to be implying that, and I mean, I know I was a co-author, but I've rather forgotten exactly what was in it. The science paper, you know, the 2015 science paper.
That does cover a lot of what we talk about here, you know, in it's sort of.
So I think we can shorten some of this and put in a reference to that.
Introduction, see science paper 2015.
Well.
So I was wondering if we could, so to address Hans' comment that some references to other chapters comes many times, if we could somehow collect all those issues in the introduction, use the introduction to put our chapter in context with the other chapter. Yeah. So I haven't read our paper entirely again, but I have the feeling that some issues like parameter estimation may come back several times, and maybe we can just take them out of each section and just collect, like, and just mention the challenge of estimating parameters. So put the modeling chapter in context in the introduction and just collect all the references there.
Same with the intervention.
The question is how the whole volume is taught. I mean, will presumably Dennis and Valerie write a kind of introduction to the whole collection of papers, and then come the papers.
Yeah,
so
we
part
will.
of this
and I mean,
goes into your introduction.
I mean, we will, and we will try to sort of put some, you know, gather together what's in the various papers and make some sort of common remarks and so on. But I suppose the only snag is that I don't know to what extent people will actually read it as a volume rather than just going into specific papers. So I think we need to make each one sufficiently self-contained that it doesn't absolutely require, you know, that you
read the introduction first.
Yeah. Unless one wants to refer back to that, but I think so. Perhaps we don't want to say it at great length, but we do need, I think, to put the context of the other papers in here, and the bits that we see as relevant.
I also feel that we should mention previous pandemics and significant outbreaks. It seems a bit strange to completely ignore them as well. I mean, I kind of get them. You maybe don't want the historical developments as much, but you know, it's kind of, otherwise it sort of reads as if, you know, the first thing that happened was COVID. And that, you know.
I recently listened to an interesting podcast of BBC 4 on the Julian plague.
Yes, no.
I don't know whether there was much modeling there, but
Yeah.
No, but it's interesting that practical interventions have come long before any scientific theory about transmission of diseases. I mean, quarantine, isolation, various things. People understood that quite early, that was good.
Yeah, I was reading, I think about a year ago, there was an interesting article about which I think was to do with a book review of a lockdown in Florence in 1630, where the plague affected northern Italy, and Florence had a very strict lockdown where you had to stay in your house, your flat, and the people would bring you food and wine twice a day or whatever, and it was. The article was mainly about the sort of harmful effects or people not liking lockdown, but I think it as a sort of throwaway statistic, it's mentioned that the death rate in Florence from the plague was about 10%, whereas in other Italian cities it was 30 or 40%. So it seems to have been rather a successful lockdown.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting. Without any theory about transmissible agents or whatever, I mean.
I think it was obviously just understood by city authorities to be a possible intervention. And I suppose it's interesting, and I mean, it would have echoes for this present times, that I think that the authorities in Florence understood that if it was to be effective, it had to be very strict lockdown. And other cities didn't make that same choice, whether that was because they had different governments or populations who wouldn't have obeyed the rules or whatever. I don't know.
No, but quarantine for 40 days.
But that's a rather different thing. That was that was mostly at ports, wasn't it?
Yes. Ships coming in had to stay far out for 40 days before people were allowed to land, if any had survived. That was the idea.
Yeah, well, you already have the quarantine laws in some way of the leprosy in the Old Testament, right?
Yes, but they were isolated instead. So if you had lepra, then you were sent away to a village.
And one interesting paper I read years ago is that someone analyzed the spread of not diseases, but of the Qatar heresies in the medieval times, using network theory and finding the super spreaders, and the way of dealing with the heresies was as by the church was actually could be explained by quite some network epidemic theory. Find the super spreaders and isolate them or kill them, cull them.
Yes, usually kill them. No, it's interesting that interventions have often been, as you say, kind of natural or reasonable, without really theory behind it. But that's what we can do, and we do it. And but we have progressed. We have models.
Yeah.
So.
And some things go natural. Like I remember also that one time somebody was explaining how good David Beckham was in mathematics, that he could, in the way he got a shot and had the right curl in the shot.
So you mean he was calculating all the time?
Yeah, well, of course that's not the case, but I think it comes quite natural to someone who I suspect of not knowing the very basics of mathematics, can still produce those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess to some extent, all this is evolved behavior as well.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be here if our forebears hadn't avoided disease. Okay, so Valerie, shall I if I sort of take a look at the introduction and sort of maybe suggest where we might want to change things, then I could maybe have a conversation with you or via email.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I think apart from sort of cutting bits going along with Hans's sort of comments, that the two things are putting the links to the other chapters better in the introduction, and the bit about, you know, what's in the context of the last volume going forward. So it's those two areas that I think we need to sort of add, but maybe take out some other stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
That was my, but maybe when we get to it, it doesn't require much more than
my feeling is it's actually not that terrible, and then
I'm hoping not. I think a couple of paragraphs and some changes or additional references might go a long way to doing it.
No, then it will of course be up to two reviewers and Hans again.
Well, not Hans again. I mean, yes, it'll just the reviewers, whoever gets allocated.
And then Hans will look at that, but yes.
And the reviewers, of course, might come up with some totally different.
Almost certainly will.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question, since most people involved in this field have been involved in some of these papers.
Yes, finding reviewers is going to be a challenge.
I was going to say that if people have suggestions for reviewers, that would be quite.
Well, essentially, they must all be Americans or something like that, because we don't have that many people from the US. I don't know. That's Hans' problem to find reviewers for this, or else we cross-review our papers.
No, it's Hans isn't an editor, so it's not his problem to find the reviewer.
He's not an editor of the.
No. So he's just doing this out of the good of his heart. But he's. I mean, we may well consult him about reviews, and of course, when this is submitted, we have to suggest 2 or 3 reviewers.
Yeah.
So we need to think about that.
If people have got suggestions, then we get to note them.
Okay, shall we do one more week?
Would Frank be a possible reviewer? He hasn't been involved really.
Yeah, and the same for Thomas House, I think.
Yeah. Tom Britton might be another one.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you can. If you want an Italian, you can involve our Andrea Pugliese.
Yeah.
kind of is in this field. And he has not been involved, as far as I know, in any of these papers, right?
No.
No, we can find some.
Yeah, definitely. But again, no Americans at the moment.
Okay, shall we work on for a week then on these things? I still have my homework to do, and
Yeah, so yeah, I was going to say that the endemic stuff, we haven't kind of decided where to put that or what to do with that. So that'd be great. Thanks, GMP.
yeah, oh yes, I'll do my best, because I've had a week with a lot of exams, but now they have been done. So the situation is better for the time to come now.
Yeah, I have either a pile of 9 or 20 theses to read.
Okay.
I think that 9 sounds better.
Yes. What
You have the choice.
decides whether it's 9 or 20?
Yes.
It depends on whether the one who would do the others usually will be
Okay.
recovered in time.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, bye,
Francesca
Francesca.
wants to leave. Okay,
Bye,
hello, Francesca.
Sorry, let me know if I can help with something.
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you. Remember, you were going to prod Lorenzo.
I will.
Yes, Prod Lorenzo, that's a
I'll
hard
give
word.
you a big stick.
Be careful.
Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
And
Bye.
we meet again on the 35th of May. with the
I can't
calculation
do next Friday, whatever the date is. I'm
The
afraid
4th, it must be the 4th or something.
Yeah,
I shall be missing next Friday.
yeah. I'm the 4th of June. I might be not there either, but email.
Shall we then, instead of the 4th of June, put things in the Dropbox and write emails about what we have
Yeah.
put on the Dropbox?
Yeah, I think that would be useful. And then, yeah.
So you're suggesting we don't meet next week? Or
Well, I was going to suggest we do meet anyway, because there are a lot.
Those who can, of course, can meet.
Yeah,
there's
okay.
Nina
Cool.
and
Those
very
of us who
people.
can have a catch up.
Yeah.
Okay, so the 4th of May, there is a meeting, let's say.
Yeah. Well, it gives other people who can't be there, gives them a sort of deadline to maybe put something, send an email or put something in the Dropbox.
Yeah, I think it's kind of useful to have that at least.
Okay. Okay, well,
Okay.
thanks so much, Glenn.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Bye then.
you.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.